Welcome back, class. Let's discuss the cluster A disorders, the odd or eccentric disorders. Just like a snowflake is unique and different, so are these personality disorders. First, let's talk about paranoid personality disorder. Again, this is the odd or eccentric cluster. The overriding words that I want you to think about in association with this is distrust and suspicion. They are distrustful and suspicious of other people in a deep and pervasive way, and their core belief is, I cannot trust people. I'm going to give you a case study for each of these disorders. Tom was hard to live with. As an insurance adjuster, he was certain that everyone cheated and that he must be vigilant for cheating at all times. He kept a high fence and bright security lights around his house, causing neighbors to avoid their family. On Halloween night, he would either wash his car so he could spray the kids with water to keep them away as they walked up, or he would clean his gun on the doorstep. Dented garbage cans after garbage collection day occasioned raging letters to the waste company and the mayor. He didn't allow his wife Harriet to hold a job or go out during the day for pleasure. She coped by secretly shopping, and then right before he came home, she would change out of her clothes and into an apron, and she would start cooking some bacon and onions that she had started up and diced up in the morning so that he'd think she'd been cooking all day. And as he would come in, she would serve him coffee while she, quote, put the finishing touches on his dinner. Tom never knew why he had a cup of coffee before dinner every night, but Harriet did tell their daughter Jennifer what the reason was. And it was to buy her a little bit of time to make dinner because she'd really been gone all day. Jennifer grew up with a sense of basic mistrust, obviously, and a need for perfection. Her father, Tom, had instilled in her that others would cheat or harm her if she was not vigilant. Jennifer had married Larry, who adored her and was a very good father. Jennifer and Larry had met through Jennifer's very attractive cousin, Lisa, who worked with Larry. Jennifer was very jealous of Lisa and the time she and Larry spent at work. She avoided any social contact with Lisa and grilled Larry endlessly about how much time he'd spent with Lisa at work. Jennifer had learned from her father that no one could be trusted no matter how vigilant you were. After all, her mother had been manipulating her father for years, and he never knew. Of course, Harriet's manipulations were just a way for her to try to get through a very difficult life with Tom and were quite innocuous. But this is not an uncommon situation where the paranoid person's behavior causes other people to behave in a way that is deceptive, thus reinforcing their paranoid beliefs. Clinical description of paranoid personality disorder is pervasive distrust and suspiciousness of others without any justification. Sometimes we are distrustful and suspicious, and rightly so, but this is a case where it's not justified. They're very self-centered, critical, arrogant, argumentative. So Tom would argue with his wife, he would argue with the mayor, he would argue with the garbage collectors. He was very sensitive to criticism. Events that have nothing to do with them are interpreted as personal attacks. So if the neighbor's dog is barking, then Tom would assume that this was done purposefully to annoy him. The greatest impact of the disorder is dysfunctional relationships with others. So Tom's behavior caused a terrible relationship with his wife and caused her a great deal of misery. And it also caused their daughter Lisa to have some dysfunction of her own. The paranoid personality does lead to considerable distress, often culminating in the 40s with work and relationship problems. At work, the paranoid people are preoccupied with trustworthiness and find others lacking. So they will, they might go through another person's drawers or booby trap a drawer to try to catch them cheating or sneaking around. They might scrutinize the actions of others. So they might, be watchful and staring at them. They're hostile, aloof, unfriendly. Their mistrust leads them to be highly self-sufficient and controlling of others. So in a work group, Tom is not going to be able to work with other people. He's going to assume that they are backhanding him, and he will try to be controlling of the group, or he will be so deeply suspicious of them that they can sense this, and so they don't want to work with him. They tend to be real grandiose in their opinions of their own work and rank. They tend to think that they do everything really well, and so they should have some special privileges. This sounds a little bit like narcissism, and sometimes these two can coexist. When those privileges aren't forthcoming, they blame others for being unfair or malevolent. So Tom is going to think that he deserves a promotion, and then when Joe gets the promotion, he's going to say his boss is unfair or Joe malevolently stole the job from him. There's definitely a genetic component. There is a relationship to schizophrenia. People with this disorder primarily have a problem with their cognitions. They have inappropriate schemas. They believe people are malevolent and deceptive, that they will hurt you if they can, and that you are only okay if you stay on your toes. Parents certainly are reinforcing these kinds of beliefs. Parents may have taught them that they must never make a mistake, or parents may have taught them not to trust others. So a kid comes home from school and is discussing how there's, a kid bumped into them in the hallway and their stuff got all knocked to the floor and the kid just kept going. Well, one parent might say, oh no, I'll bet that was really upsetting, and what did you do? And, he probably was busy and needed to go, needed to get where he was going, or he was just thoughtless. But another kind of parent might say, you can't trust people at all. And so I'm sure he meant to do that. And so you need to watch out for this kid. People who develop paranoid personality disorder often were verbally abused by their parents, or physically abused, or were neglected as children. So this is going to be a high control, low warmth parenting style, or it would be a low control, low warmth parenting style. And the lack of warmth or the excessive control feeds into this paranoia. Mass, in her 2019 book, you'll see this cited at the end of this presentation. It's an excellent book available through the TCC library if you'd like to take a look at it. She gives this excellent description of the paranoid person. There is a coexistence of feelings of superiority and inferiority, the presence of profound mistrust with naive gullibility, hidden inferiority with arrogant demandingness, internal sensitivity with apparent emotional coldness, superficial asexuality with vulnerability to erotomania, and vigilant attention with inability to see the whole picture. So they feel better than everybody else, but worse than everybody else at the same time. They distrust everybody, but they'll believe some crazy conspiracy theory. They feel like internally they feel really bad about themselves, but they come across as arrogant and demanding. They're cold to other people, but very sensitive inside. Outside, their outer behavior will be asexual, but they are vulnerable to erotomania. And of course, they're paying attention very, very closely to what's going on around them, but oftentimes it's the details and they don't see the whole picture. Therapy's hard because a paranoid person does not trust their therapist. In fact, many people will not seek treatment even if a spouse asks them to, because of the deep mistrust they have. Many of them don't see themselves as having a problem, but see themselves as justifiably suspicious. As with most personality disorders, it can't really be cured. But a person can learn some better skills for relating to the world. They could hold down a job and maintain relationships. Treatment might include antipsychotics, antidepressants, or anti-anxiety drugs, and intensive psychotherapy. Dwight Schrute almost certainly has paranoid personality disorder. As I was developing this lecture, I was thinking to myself of all of the characters in books, movies, TV that I have seen who fit these 10 personality disorder profiles. Sometimes I think that people actually go to the DSM and look at the list of symptoms and create characters based on that. Well, Dwight Schrute is clearly a case of paranoid personality disorder. He has pervasive distrust. He is deeply suspicious of other people. He reads hidden meaning into things and perceives himself as attacked and then counterattacks. Schizoid personality disorder, also cluster A, odd or eccentric. The Key defining features are detachment and restricted emotions. This is a person who is very, very flat emotionally, very detached, doesn't need other people. This is a person whose core belief is that relationships are messy and undesirable. Andy had a decent time in elementary school, but he did keep to himself, even to the point of eating lunch alone or even hiding in the bathroom during lunch to avoid other people. After school, as the other kids laughed and jostled one another, Andy waited quietly for the bus. As he got off and other kids excitedly told their parents about their day, Andy stayed quiet. Home life was fine, but at school he was ridiculed for his odd behaviors. He ignored it with no expression on his face, and so the bullies moved on to other kids from whom they could get a reaction. His mother made him join scouts for a time, but he spent all his time alone building things. While teachers in elementary school tried hard to pull him out of his shell, he was left alone in middle and high school because he was not disruptive. He was easy to ignore. Andy spent every available minute in his room playing solitary video games and listening to music. It was obvious the only thing he enjoyed was being alone in his room. Even when forced to participate in family activities, he remained expressionless. In high school, his grades fell and he didn't go to college. He held a series of low-paying jobs until he settled on one that required no interaction with people at all. Andy spent all his free time alone in his studio apartment. He had no friends and no sexual partners. From his perspective, music, computer games, internet were all he needed for pleasure and excitement. He didn't understand why his family continued to bother him and call him a hermit. He wasn't hurting anyone, including himself. Andy was completely content. So the clinical description of schizoid personality disorder is that the person neither desires nor enjoys being in relationships or being part of a family. They almost always choose to engage in solitary activities. They have little, if any, interest in having sexual experiences with another person. They take pleasure in few, if any, activities. So we saw with Andy, he just wanted to play games in his room on his computer. And when he played games, this wasn't games that you play over the internet with other people. It was always solitary games. He lacked close confidence or friends and was indifferent to praise or criticism. It didn't even matter to him that the kids tried to bully him at school. He was indifferent. The blank expression on his face when they bullied him was genuine. And because they got no rise out of him, they moved on to someone else. They have emotional coldness, flat affect, and they're detached. Causes and treatment for schizoid, childhood shyness is a precursor for this. Abuse and neglect are common in people with this disorder. There is a significant overlap between autism spectrum disorder and schizoid personality disorder, not uncommon for those to be diagnosed together. These people tend not to seek help because they are not distressed by their behavior, and they don't see any kind of problem with it. The distress that might exist would be on the part of family members who are worried about this person. They like their lifestyle and are, if they go into treatment, they're deeply uncomfortable about changing it. They don't want to change it. They don't see a reason to change it. They believe that it's the family's problem for not accepting them as they are. If they do enter treatment and try, treatment would involve learning empathy, social skills, and that there is value in social relationships. Severus Snape is my example of schizoid personality disorder. He's a loner, has no friends, doesn't want relationships, engages in solitary activities, and tends to be cold and detached. So remember, schizoid is the flat affect person, the emotionless person who doesn't want relationships. Let's talk schizotypal personality disorder. This is the last of the cluster A, odd or eccentric disorders. Again, remember schizo in schizoid and schizotypal does not mean schizophrenia. It's possible that this can lead into it, but it's not like a low-grade version of schizophrenia. There's actually a version of that called schizophreniform disorder, which is like low-grade schizophrenia. So this is an odd or eccentric type. There is relationship discomfort. So they've got that discomfort with relationships. They're loners, but in addition to this flat affect and being a loner that you see with schizoid, you add cognitive and perceptual distortions, not to the rising to the level of schizophrenia with outright hallucinations, but you get some ideas of reference. You don't have full-on delusions. You might have some odd perceptual distortions, but not a full-on hallucination. The belief of the schizotypal person is that it's better to be isolated from others. Here's Joe. Joe was a graduate student who was tolerated until he was decidedly excluded from all social events. He wore a disheveled, mismatching coat and tie and red sneakers to class, but overalls and sandals with no socks to a faculty reception. He was unkempt and dirty, didn't comb his hair. He was completely inappropriate in his behavior. He would march in noisily to the classroom in his coat and tie and sneakers when everybody else is in t-shirts and jeans, and caused quite a bit of disruption as he entered. And then everybody else is wearing, business casual to the faculty reception, and here he is in overalls and no socks. He was really smart, high intelligence, but he had some really odd beliefs. He believed in the paranormal, and he talked endlessly about knowing what had happened to people before they told him about it. So he would show up to a graduate student reception, or not a reception, like a bar hangout on a Friday afternoon, and somebody would say, "Hey, this happened to me." And he'd say, "Well, I knew that was going to happen." You can imagine how off-putting that would be. He had constantly asserted that he had special skills of clairvoyance and knowledge of the future. He said to anybody who would listen that he had predicted Hurricane Katrina and had tried to tell the government, but they never called him back. His fellow students started to avoid him. They switched the location of the Friday afternoon bar get-together, and he showed up and found himself alone. He asked them about it. They said, "Oh, they changed it," and thought he knew. They told him the new location, and when he showed up to the new location on the following Friday, they weren't there either. They really were avoiding him, which this kind of behavior only served to increase his paranoia and delusions. He finally did find some friends in some drug-using, fringy sort of undergrads who treated him as their pet monkey. They would give him hallucinogens and marijuana, and they would encourage him to talk about the paranormal and about his special skills and to demonstrate that to them. And then they would laugh at him. He finally caught on to this behavior and realized what he was to them, that they weren't real friends, that they were laughing at him. And this made him engage in even more odd behavior and withdraw from people further. So with schizotypal disorder, there are ideas of reference. Ideas of reference mean that they believe that things that happen are specially related to them when they're completely not. So they might see Hurricane Katrina happen and think that, they knew about it and could have told somebody about it. Excluding a delusion of reference. Delusions of reference would be with schizophrenia. Ideas of reference would be a lower form of it. So a person with a delusion of reference might believe that they are God or Gandhi reincarnated, or truly believe that a coin on the street has special significance to them, whereas an idea of reference is is on a smaller scale. They have odd beliefs and magical thinking that influences their behavior and is inconsistent with subcultural norms. So they're superstitious. They might believe in clairvoyance, telepathy, or sixth sense. In children or adolescents, it might be bizarre fantasies or preoccupations. They have unusual perceptual experiences, including bodily illusions, odd thinking in speech. So their speech would be suspicious. I need to fix this. Their speech would be vague, metaphorical, over elaborate, stereotyped. They're suspicious and paranoid. They have inappropriate or constricted affect. So affect is that emotional expression on your face. It's going to be either inappropriate, like they're laughing when everybody else is somber, or they might be really, really flat and constricted and showing no emotion. They have behavior and appearance that is odd, eccentric or peculiar. So we saw with Joe that he wore very strange clothing and would engage in really odd, peculiar behaviors. Because of their behaviors, they tend to lack close friends and confidence, and they have social anxiety that doesn't diminish with familiarity, and tends to be associated with paranoid fears rather than negative judgments about self. So schizotype historically described people predisposed to schizophrenia. But they do share some common features. Schizotypal and schizophrenia do share some common features in terms of ideas of reference, illusions, and paranoia. And it may be a precursor to schizophrenia, but we would not really say that it is a low level of schizophrenia, although maybe that will be considered. There's definitely genetics that predispose people to either schizotypal or schizophrenia. Childhood maltreatment is for sure one of the causes, and there seems to be damage in the left hemisphere that results in some decrements in memory and learning. If they seek help, it's often for anxiety or depression, which comes along with the schizotypal disorder because they are so alone and other people are rejecting of them. Treatment with antipsychotics, community treatment, and social skills training has been shown to reduce symptoms and delay onset of schizophrenia, which is quite a remarkable feat. Creed Bratton is my example of schizotypal. He has ideas of reference. He tends to believe all kinds of crazy things about the world. He has very odd speech patterns and says strange things. He's very suspicious and paranoid. He has a very odd, unusual appearance. He doesn't have any friends. So I think he's a great example of schizotypal. So we'll see you in the next video. This was cluster A, odd or eccentric, and we had paranoid, and the paranoid person is mistrustful and suspicious. We had schizoid. This is a person who is unaffected by human emotions and relationships. And then we had schizotypal, where this is a person who's odd and eccentric, has some ideas of reference, a little bit of paranoia, some very odd behaviors, and tend to be on their own as well. And I'll see you in the next video.